I get introduced at McKinsey events as the asshole guy, jokingly, but seriously.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to Truth Works, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and, well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hi, welcome.
Today we're joined by Bob Sutton. Super excited to talk to him. Patty, can you tell us about Bob?
Bob's an old friend. Old as in we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah, I'm old too.
Yeah. Bob, tell us who you are. Give us your professional intro.
I'm an organizational psychologist, and I thought I was going to be a business school professor, but I ended up being a professor in the Stanford School of Engineering for 40 years. I don't know how this happened. And I started out doing serious publisher parish academic research on things like emotion in organizations and organization death. But somewhere along the line, I sold my soul to corporate America, and I've just finished my 8th sort of business book. This is called The Friction Project with Huggy Rao. So that's a short resume.
Amazing.
And so today, what we wanted to do was to kind of go back in time and stitch together all the things that you've learned and taught us. So Bob and I are also a part of a group of authors called the Silicon Guild. And it's all these, Adam Grant and Rita McGrath and all these Silicon Valley authors.
Do you meet in a dark basement somewhere?
No, we meet online. So during the pandemic, we did cocktail hour, huh, Bob?
Yep.
So it was mostly like, what the fuck do we do now that we have to teach classes and do talks online? And so we've all gone through this sort of transformation together. So the typical thing is you go from whoever the fuck you are to author to speaker. So that's a lot of what we've shared together. But what I want to talk about today, what I want Jessica to help us talk about today is moving from no assholes to your new book about friction and what you've learned along the way. And are modern assholes the same as...
Oh, God, we're going to talk about assholes. We can talk about assholes.
No. But let's talk about that interconnectivity. And then the thing about friction is that it's very much about scaling. And our listeners are mostly CEOs and leaders of companies that are hopefully successful and growing. And our through line, just so you know, is about honesty. So that's why we call it Truth Works. It's like, what if we just told the truth?
What would happen?
What would happen? You would have Patty McCord. That's what would happen. Just knowing you, Patty, it's like, oh, God. And that's who you are. Anyway.
That's true. So let's start with your new book, The Friction Project. Can you tell us what friction is? And what are some of the most common examples?
Well, I'm not a physicist. As an organizational psychologist, to me, organizational friction is when your customers or employees try to do something and it ends up being harder, slower, or even impossible. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And to give you my favorite quick summary example, that you can use good friction to fight bad friction. There's a guy named Laszlo Bock, who some of you may know. He was head of basically HR at Google for about 8 or 9 years. He gets to Google. There's a tradition that Larry and Sergey started where they do 8, 10, 12, as many as 25 selection interviews. The 25 comes from Laszlo. And this is bad friction. If you've got to schedule 25 interviews for a candidate, and it also drives the candidates crazy too. So he put in a simple rule. So it's friction, a little speed bump, that if you need to do more than 4 interviews, you need written permission from me as basically an EVP and head of HR. And he said the number of interviews just plummeted. And to me, that's an example of something that was bad friction. All of this, I just can't imagine being in HR and trying to schedule those interviews, just that alone, not to mention the amount of time it took from engineers and stuff. And so that's just an example of good friction, stopping bad friction. There's lots of more complex examples in the book, but that to me sort of summarizes the point in some way.
That's amazing. Thank you.
So from assholes to friction, just tell me what's changed over time.
On friction, what's changed is I'm even slower than I used to be. But I just think that you just said the most brilliant line we're warming up, which is that we're a member of a group where you go from whatever the fuck you did to being an author to being a speaker, which is, that sounds about right. Yeah. And I've sort of gone through that over and over again in the last 20-something years. But the no asshole rule is, I hate to say it, but it took less time to write. I knew less about that subject than any book that I wrote. It's the shortest book that I wrote. And then one thing about it that's also interesting, and Patty and I know this game, is when you publish a book, you are supposed to get blurbs. You're supposed to get, this is the greatest book ever. So, of course, we couldn't get anybody to blurb the No Asshole Rule because of the dirty title. So it has no blurbs. So,
I'll blurb it.
What? No, too late now. It's like nobody would blurb it in 2006. And so now I have like the conversation. I have the best editor I've ever had, Tim Bartlett at St. Martin's. And, we spent all this time having to get them Adam Grant blurb and then, like the CHR of Walmart. But the fact is that my best-selling book has no blurb. So the No Asshole Rule is sold more than everything else combined. So I'm always just sort of like confused about it. But to back up, the No Asshole Rule, I viewed as a temporary detour from my real work, okay? Mm-hmm. So I viewed myself as a serious scholar who did innovation. And the book that I wrote just before that, which took like 4 or 5 years, was on evidence-based management. Talk about facts with Jeff Pfeffer. Truth matters. Yes, I'm interested in fact, when Jeff's line is, I'm interested in what is true, not what is new. That was his line. And about evidence-based. And then when the No Asshole Rule was sort of over, what happened was I went back to writing, and if I would say the last 15 years, what my colleague Huggy Rao and I have been doing, and you've been occasionally part of this adventure,
yes, I have,
is that we study, write about, and speak about leading at scale. And by the way, another thing about speaking is I don't think I've had 4 well-paid speeches about the No Asshole Rule because companies won't invite me to pay me to talk about the No Asshole Rule. I think usually because their CEOs and stuff are assholes.
Probably.
They don't want me to talk about assholes, or they want me to talk about it indirectly. So in terms of speaking and just also in terms, honestly, I think in terms of intellectual and useful rigor, Huggy and I have been studying aspects of leading at scale for the last 15 or 16 years, probably since about 2007 or 2008. Yeah. So the way I put it is my main focus, asshole stuff aside, is focusing on, how to grow companies. Yeah. So that's one aspect of scaling. Another aspect of scaling is how you spread things throughout small or even large organizations, good design thinking, agile, things like that. Now it's AI is happening like crazy. And then the third thing, which led to the friction book, is, all these organizations, and I don't know about Netflix, which you know about better than I do, but Google, Meta, Salesforce, they got larger and larger, and it got harder and harder to get things done in them. So we got interested in friction. And by the way, not to mention my university, which, I've been here 40 years, and it sure was a lot easier to get things done when I got here. Mm-hmm. And just to give you a fact, the School of Engineering, which only has about 25% more faculty than it did when I got here in 1983. When I first got here, we had exactly 1 bean counter. This guy named Ken Down, he was in the dean's office, only 1 person in finance for the whole School of Engineering. Now they're everywhere. I mean, in my department, it depends how you count. We have 3 or 4 alone. And there's this whole group of bean counters. And if you take it out to infinity, they've grown so fast that pretty soon it's going to be 1 professor and 30,000 bean counters if we take it out to 2075.
I have one question, Bob, before we move off of assholes.
Yes, Jessica.
I just want to know who or what was the inspiration for the book?
Oh, well, there were 2 things. Okay, I'll tell you the truth. One was sort of a minor inspiration, was that I wrote a little piece for the Harvard Business Review on assholes. And they actually used the word assholes, which I couldn't believe, in the Harvard Business Review about the no asshole rule. And I got more emails than anything I ever got in my life, like just thousands of them. I couldn't believe, because I write a Harvard Business Review article, and usually I'd get like 4 emails, 1 speaking engagement would fall through, and that's what happened my last one. So this was a market test. And the other thing is 2 things were going on. One, and I will not name her, but I had a boss who was clearly an asshole. Okay. And this I did not like. But there was another part of it, which is more important. My wife had a job during that period where she was managing partner of a quite large law firm. As Marina described it, she was basically doing asshole management, especially with men, by the way, difficult men. They were the first women to run an AmLaw 100 law firm. And so asshole management was her job. And there's a survey in the book, which is now called the ARS. You can find it online, the Asshole Rating Self-Exam. It's not called that in the book. Guy Kawasaki found it and put it online and renamed it the ARS. Anyhow, so I write my wife an email and I say, so my editor wants a quiz. Patty, they always want a quiz. They never work.
That's right.
We want a quiz. Yeah. Okay, so I said, Marina, do you have a quiz to assess whether I am an asshole? I'm not kidding. In 20 minutes, all she did was thought of every difficult partner that she dealt with. I'm the smartest person in the room, a whole bunch of things like that. And she just sent me this list, and I spent 10 minutes editing it, and we put it in the book, and that's where the arse came from. And she usually doesn't even read my books. And that thing, it's been filled, I don't know, by about 300,000 or 400,000 people. It's sort of about the same number as book sales.
I feel like if you have to take a quiz to know, you probably are.
Well, and in the second book, which didn't sell as well, The Asshole Survival Guide, which I tried to answer the same question that, 10,000 people asked me. I work for an asshole boss. What do I do? That was sort of like over and over and over again. But my perspective on that is, if you look at the evidence, it's best to start out with the assumption that assholes are us, because people who are assholes don't recognize it, who are what we would call certified assholes. Those are people across times and places who are assholes. But almost all of us can become temporary assholes under the wrong conditions. When we're tired, we're in a hurry, we're around a lot of assholes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
an asshole does bring out another asshole. It's true.
It's a contagious disease.
Yeah, it's a magnetic thing. Bob, so I was listening to our podcast, and you said to me, well, as you know, Patty, as organizations become larger and they become more complex, and there's more bureaucracy, and it becomes hell on earth, and everybody hates it. And my voice is like, no!
So it's kind of interesting, because I think the Friction podcast was 2016, 2017. It was kind of 2 years. Yeah. But that was the point where we started the book because we got kind of in the same mode my friend Jeff Pfeffer lives in every day, which is the world sucks. It's impossible to get things done. We're bombarded with email. We're bombarded with meetings, rules, blah, blah. But then, somewhere along the way, and I hate to be optimistic, but we learned 2 things. One was, we kept learning about leaders and organizations that actually at least made things less bad. And there's actually ways to do this, including in the book, we quote you as somebody who's good at making things less bad, Patty.
Oh, thank you.
Go, Patty.
And then the other thing is that we learned about friction. So this is like, obstacles that slow you down. There's all these times when slowing down and making things difficult actually makes sense. So if you do the journey, you were early in the journey, but the 2 lessons that emerged is, while we turned pretty optimistic, it's tough. It's like our argument, it's like mowing the lawns. You got to fight against it constantly. But then there's all these things in life that should be hard and should be slow. And I think that, the OpenAI folks sort of learned that weekend that they fired Sam Altman that maybe some things should happen a little bit slower.
Yeah, no. Totally. And it's like, so when I left Netflix and I was consulting, it was in the era of the Next.com boom and Happy HR. So, literally, I met with people I'm the chief happiness officer, right? And if people aren't happy, they're going to leave. And if they leave, then,
But by the way, they still say it.
Jesus. So one of the assignments I give to them that I think links into this is go find 3 or 4 people in your organization who are incredibly successful and everybody knows it. It doesn't have to be by title, and ask them about something they did that contributed to the health of the company or customer or whatever. And every single story will be something that's hard.
Oh, so, okay. Well, if you want to start here, that our argument about removing bad friction is not that all friction is bad. It's that, it's like too many meetings, too many emails, we can go down the list, too many burdensome procedures that have to suck our soul, and we get exhausted and frustrated. But the things in life that really matter, to your point, should be hard. Mm-hmm. And we quote people like Ed Catmull from Pixar saying how many rounds of failure they went through, blah, blah, blah. But my favorite example, which is not mine, was an interview that, and this is so like fish out of water, Harvard Business Review, some people call it HBR, they interviewed Jerry Seinfeld. And it's fabulous. And it starts out, and the editor of HBR says, so you and Larry David were really, really detail-oriented and struggled in the writer's room. Could McKinsey have come in and made the process more efficient? That was one reason they quit. They were burned out. So Jerry Seinfeld says, who's McKinsey? Which is absolutely beautiful. And then they tell me they're consulting firm. And then he says, are they funny? And they say no. And he said, then I don't need them. And then he says, the hard way is the right way. And then if we look at empirical evidence about what it takes, and you all have lived in creative organizations, like creativity is really hard. It's like filled really with failure. Hard. It's filled with disagreement. Mm-hmm. And this is when it works. Mm-hmm. It's filled with struggle and doubt. And again, I've never seen a creative process that worked that was smooth and beautiful and loving every minute. Maybe you have, but I've heard stories like that, but they're usually bullshit.
I think that's true. And I think that's interesting that you're saying that, because I believe that to be true. And I think with the younger generation of work, they've sort of been on a high of work where work's been great and companies have been on an upward trajectory, and now things are a little bit tough. And it's, sort of the sky is falling and they don't know how to deal with it. And I've seen sort of an interesting sort of reckoning. Maybe
that's true in some organizations. If I would pick the main two groups of people I talk to, it's sort of a weird combination of people. Yeah. I work with lots of companies like you, but I know really a lot of heads of HR. Therefore, really a lot of former heads of HR, by the way, because they don't last that long.
Like, well, look who you're talking to here.
Yeah, two former heads of HR. 14
years since you last 14 years? It's a long time. Yeah. And then I know a lot of Stanford students. And they've kind of gone through the same thing, what Stanford students and what heads of HR have gone through, since the heads of HR hire them, is that, well, first they went through sort of just in the last few years, the social justice movement, which was really very difficult. Then one day they're told that we all have to go on Zoom. Like literally at Stanford, we had like 2 days notice and we all got sent home. Everybody got sent home. Then all the companies hired heads of HR that hire. Well, the companies also had to change to remote work, right? Then they had to hire like crazy. So all my friends that were heads of HR and all my students, they got all those job offers and hire like crazy. Okay. Yeah. Then the companies realized that they hired too many people. And the heads of HR take all the grief. And by the way, the young students who get laid off they all get laid off. Okay. And then we all thought we were going to lose our money. We thought there's going to be a banking crisis. It was about 2 or 3 weeks. And now we've got all the issues with the Palestinians and the Israelis, which is really a difficult problem for most organizations I know how to deal with. I don't know the solution, but to be the president of Stanford and have to deal with that and the head of HR. So my point is, this doesn't sound very easy to me for anyone.
Well,
it's not.
Here's the inside secret from Jessica and I. It never fucking was. Hello?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not easy. But
no.
So, when I sort of was going to retire, I wasn't going to come back. I wasn't going to talk about anything until the great pandemic and the online, work from home movement. And I said, whenever I used to do a talk, I would go up on stage and say, you can do this differently. You can think about it differently. And they'd say, oh, we wish we could, but we're not in tech and we're not Netflix and we're not in the US and we're regular. We couldn't possibly work from home.
And then it all happened over in a weekend.
48 hours later, we did. And now everybody says to me, who's doing best practices for working from home? I'm like, fucking nobody.
Nobody, that's true. It's very
Nobody has figured this out. We're all still figuring it out.
Well, now the question is, how do you get them back at the office?
Well, and how do we go back to the way it was? And the answer is, we can't.
Never.
No, that's like Sadal Neely wrote The Remote Work Revolution. It's like the cat's out of the bag. It's never going to quite look the same.
Because we didn't have the tools. To be fair, right? We couldn't have done that 5 years ago, and we have it now. And so I'm really curious about that, because I remember the last time I was at Stanford, I did a class with Huggy, and I'm talking about the Netflix culture and blah, blah, blah. And he says, class, what do you think of this? Would you like to work at Netflix? They're like, hell no. I thought, I'm with the most innovative MBA students in the world at Stanford. They're like, no, I want job security and I want a career path.
Scary.
And
so I do, the Netflix deck every year with my master's in engineering. And I do think that MBAs, with all due respect, have more of a sense of entitlement than engineers do. And Netflix probably hires more engineers than MBAs even now. And so I get about 50-50.
That's interesting.
Okay.
And then they all fight with each other, which is really fun to watch them fight.
So our story is I left as Netflix became a streaming service, and then Jessica had my job as Netflix became a global streaming service, right? So what did you see, Jess?
All the stuff that Bob just walked you through.
It's so hard.
So hard. And, I worked for Patty for many years, Bob. So I started when the company was 250 salaried employees. And then when I left, we were over 10,000. And so getting 10,000 people around the globe, plus our productions, to go and work overnight was quite daunting.
But the other thing that happened at Netflix, at least as I teach it, so I could be lying, but as I teach it, is you seem to be one of the only organizations I know, or I realize you're not there anymore, that did 2 self-disruptions and they worked. From CDs to streaming and streaming to the largest production company in the world, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah, we did.
So, you two must have done something right. That's really hard to do. It is. It's really hard.
It's all because of Jessica and me.
Okay. Well, I'll give you, you deserve some credit. It's hard to do.
Well, I think that's true. I think we made a big impact on that organization. However, I also think we had a CEO, thankfully, who really saw into the future. He wasn't bad, and he could see in the future, and he was relentless about making that disruption and doing it well. And, sometimes at a cost of friction.
So Bob, Jessica's a VC now. So she's working with early stage startups.
Oh, good for you.
And so
Thanks.
One of the things that we want to use your great brain on is like, what can we tell them? The new leaders coming up, you and I have years of experience, but what should they just not fucking do ever? And because you've done this statistically, we do it instinctively, right? And our instinct is like, don't lie to them, okay? It's just going to get you caught and in trouble.
The way I think of it with startup CEOs and startup teams is that there's this process of realizing that they've got to let go. It's not just about them. They're actually building a system and an organization. And that starts with the team. And I think you taught me this partly, Patty, because you can't run and scale an organization without really tending to the top team. And so some of the things that we think about in terms of letting go is, one of the early things, and this is if they don't hire a head of HR or somebody bringing talent early, isn't that usually one of the first people they need to hire?
It depends. I would say, Jessica, I want your perspective on this. It kind of depends at the really early VC stage on who their board is and who their funders are, because a lot of people say, well, okay, you've got a product, it's going to be successful, you've got customers, you're acting like children, it's time to hire a grown-up to put in the rules and processes so you won't act like children anymore. Because that's the way we came up. Right. And then they hire a very traditional head of HR. And so our story is, I came up through recruiting. I met Jessica as a headhunter, and I'm like, why the hell am I doing corporate recruiting when headhunting's not, it's not brain surgery, it's a talent. So that's how I hired Jessica, right? But most people hire heads of HR early on to create the rules and the process and the systems and the forms, instead of hiring a head of HR that's like, we are going to find the best talent for this company ever.
I think that's true, Patty. I think, again, there's an evolution happening within the HR industry itself, which, I think, Patty, you were a pioneer in, and it's becoming a more strategic function. But at the same time, it's still way behind, right? And this evolution's been happening for, 10, 15 years, and it's still just not there yet. You still have the people talking about, I'm the happiness person. And it's just like, no, you're not. Like, you're supposed to be making the organization more effective, right? And function at a higher level.
So just to sort of go back to your question, and this, to us, in some ways, this is like leading at scale stuff. And so, now I'm starting to give more friction talks because I have a friction book coming up with Huggy. But whether I'm talking to a startup or whether I'm talking to Microsoft, and Microsoft, which is the main company I've worked with during the pandemic and since, I kind of talked with actually their senior folks in HR, like, what are the skills you really need? So some ones I think of as delegation. This is like, you can't interview everybody. Larry Page had some issues with this. Yeah. One of the things that, we wrote about this, Lindy Greer was the senior author in Harvard Business Review at the beginning of the year. So Lindy Greer is at Michigan, and she's done all this research, including on 10 startup CEOs. What's the hallmark of a great startup CEO? Are they the boss all the time? Or do they delegate all the time? The answer is yes. They do this power shifting thing where they say, okay, let's have a conversation, let's brainstorm, blah, blah, blah. And then they make a decision. And there's some decisions like, well, whether they're going to sell the company, that those are not usually participative decisions. Right. So we talk about that. And then we talk about division. They got to break maybe you've seen this, and then some of this happened at Pixar in the early days. Like, Ed would let everybody in the room and he'd look around. There'd be like 40 people at the table. And it's like, you got to start kicking people out of the room. You got to start dividing it into pieces. Integration, you got to glue the thing together.
Right.
And then repetition. So John Lilly, maybe John Lilly was CEO of Mozilla from 12 to 600 people. John described to me that, well, every time we added 50 people, I had to say fewer things and say them over and over and over again.
So true. So you were mentioning, because I think a lot of companies struggle with this, and it's, the pace of things. But when you were talking about like slowing down is also important. And there's a difference, as you were describing it, with like, the millions of emails that you get and the millions of meetings, which, by the way, I'd love to know if you saw any companies solve that problem, because I haven't, but that's...
Well, we made a little progress. We've got a tool. I did some stuff with Asana. We have a tool. Anyway.
Oh, good. But where have you seen companies identify when to do that, right? Like, who's good at that? I don't know.
So I don't know whether it's companies, but I mean, there are companies that know when to slow down and fixing. So we're talking about creative work. Companies that do creative work, they actually will slow down and figure out what's going on so they don't just screw it up. Two companies that I would say are good at it. One is Amazon, where Jeff Bezos was very clear about the difference between a one-way and a two-way door, that if it's an irreversible decision, and this is infused in the culture, that's when you slow down. When it's reversible, well, you throw it into the marketplace. That's one. Another example, which is one of the examples we use over and over again, is Waze and Noam Barden in the early days. They were in Israel. They were not doing very well in the critical U.S. market. People would download their software, and in a month they'd stop using it. He gets $30 million in venture capital. The venture capitalists say, hire a bunch of people, do a bunch of product development. He says, no, our product sucks. We don't know what's going on. And he just hits the brakes for 6 weeks and has everybody figure out what's going on. And then he hits the gas. So that would be at least somebody who did it once right. It's hard to do it right every time.
It is, especially when at the beginning, speed is everything.
Yeah.
Right. I always tell early stage startups, your whiteboards are full of things that are like, not that, not that, not that, because you don't know until you try it. And at some point, I love that Bezos quote. I've never heard it before.
Yeah.
Right there. It's like
one-way and two-way doors. Yeah.
One-way and two-way doors.
But I mean, didn't Zuck get offered like $1 billion for Facebook from Yahoo at one point? I mean, like, I bet he slowed down and thought about that decision. That was a pretty good decision.
It's a lot of money.
But that's a big deal. That's a hard thing to do when your MO is to move fast, right? And you're surrounded by people that move fast. And so that's the other interesting part of scaling is as companies scale, different people are in the room, and there are people in the room that are more patient.
The other thing about human beings, just to be clear, is there's the risk that we humans, we do stupid things when we're in a hurry and when we're exhausted. And, psychologists, if you want to have somebody do something unethical, you just have them be sleep deprived and put them in a hurry, and then they will start taking shortcuts. And I won't go through all the research that's in the book, but the final thing that I would talk about, and I think that, and it's interesting to have the two of you who work together for so long, that one thing that is not very efficient, which I think most people understand but don't act on, is there's all this stuff about flash teams and instant relationships, which is, it's good that the airplane pilot and your surgeon who's never worked with your anesthesiologist before know the procedures and can save your life. But there is evidence, including from surgery, by the way, that when people have worked together before and they have more prior joint experience, they do better work. And, Charlie Munger just died last week. I mean, him and Warren Buffett started working together in 1965. And you can go through all of the evidence that top teams, when they're started by people, some people have worked together before. Did you know Reed before? Do I know this?
I did. I knew Reed at Pure. And, one of the things that I get a lot of flack for is that, you leave a company and it's team, not a family, right?
Right.
So that whole concept. But I've learned to temper it a little. Jessica and I are perfect examples. It's like they're not your family, but it doesn't mean that you can't have colleagues that you love,
right? Yeah,
that you respect, and that are going to be your friends for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
and I totally hear that, don't you, Jess?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you're doing something magical with a group of people, it can't help but bring you together on this whole other level that you've never been with anyone else in your life, not even your family. Right. Mm-hmm. And you're on such a high because you accomplished something incredibly hard and you did it with these people and you're like, yes, and you love them. Right. Mm-hmm. Unless they're an asshole, Bob. I mean,
well, even then, sometimes you love them.
Right.
But that's joy at work.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Pure joy. All right, it's that time for confessions. So I'm going to read one that we got in from a listener. Does being a pushover make me a bad manager? I pride myself on hiring people that I trust to get the job done and avoid micromanaging. I don't fuss if they come in late or leave a little early. If they're putting in hard work, they deserve to manage their own time. I push them to apply for other roles within the company and see myself as a bit of a mentor in that regard. Another department manager said that I'm too nice and that my team does not respect me. But I think they do. I don't want to be the asshole boss that ruins their jobs. But is there anything wrong with being too nice? What do we say, Bob and Patty?
I mean, he or she is describing this as a coach role and not a boss role. And I think the coach role over time is so much more effective. And the other thing about the coach role is it allows you to coach people that your company, your job, your department, your team is not the forever team. It allows you to figure out how you're going to grow on your own.
Yeah, I found a lot of beauty in what they wrote and very kindred spirits of how we thought about things at Netflix, Patty, because empowerment really is an amazing tool for leadership, right? Empowering your people, trusting your people.
Yeah. Well, I always say that's the word I hate most of all. That's why I named my book Powerful. It's like, why we have to empower people? Because we took it all away.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So just recognizing that it's your life. It's your career, right?
But also trust,
right.
until proven wrong. I mean, I think it's a great way to have a relationship with your employees. And, I also think you can have high expectations and still trust, right? Mm-hmm. Bob, what do you think?
Well, I didn't write The Power of Nice. I wrote the No Asshole Rule. So I think there's a difference between the two. And so long as this person, if they're delegating, if they're developing people, and I like this says that they're pushing people to get ahead and to get more. So my perspective is that so long as, if anything is fine, if it's unethical or laziness, that's not good. Right. And then the other thing, which we've discussed some already, is to me, me, what good bosses do is most of the time that they're going to be in the coach role, they're going to be in the delegation role. But there's some times when they've got to, if you will, activate the hierarchy, tell people to stop arguing and go to work, tell people that they've come in late 7 days in a row and like this is like messing up the team. And then every now and then, as you two know, sometimes somebody needs to be fired. That's just the way that it works. So I would do a yes and that as long as at key moments this person can activate the hierarchy and use their power, to use Patty's term, it's fine with me. But to me, this is why this research by Lindy Greer at University of Michigan on the best leaders know when to flex their power and how to do it is really so compelling. Because that's just my main answer to that one.
Well, I think you're right. It's the how do you flex that power, but you have to be both, right?
Yep.
It is a both and. But also, I was thinking, Bob, that this person who suggested that they're too nice, maybe they should take your asshole quiz.
the arse, yeah,
the arse quiz.
And maybe they're more of an asshole than they think.
Well, yeah. Well, I think that the arse quizzes for entertainment is incredibly scientifically unreliable. So I would suggest it for entertainment and for book sales, but not for a real scientific. I think you need, and we know this, by the way, that we humans tend to be pretty bad at self-assessment, and others are better at seeing our true selves. So what I think this person needs maybe is a little bit of a coach to see whether they need to be worried or not. That's my first reaction.
That's good advice. Bob, thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you and getting to know you, because Patty said so many wonderful things about you.
Well, Patty and I have a mutual admiration club. And I often describe Patty as the senior executive I know who swears the most. Only about 10 or 11 F-bombs today, Patty. For you, you're sort of like...
I know.
She's growing up.
Don't you think? I'm getting very professional.
She's growing up.
I am. And Bob, if people want to get a hold of you or find out more about your books, how would they do that?
BobSutton.net. And then, and it's the usual stuff. We have an HBR article coming out, Huggy and I, and we're doing a lot of speaking and all that sort of stuff. So
hugs to Huggy from me, too. Okay, kids.
Bob.
Robert.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you, Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.